Sarah Martinez had always been different from other children. While her friends played with dolls and video games, she spent her afternoons learning survival techniques from her grandfather, a former military instructor. At 12 years old, she could start a fire without matches, find water in the most unlikely places, and navigate using only the stars. Her grandfather often told her that these skills might save her life someday. But Sarah never imagined how soon that day would come. The summer she turned 16, Sarah's family decided to take a camping trip through the Mojave Desert. Her parents, both city dwellers who worked in busy offices, thought it would be a great adventure to disconnect from technology and experience nature. They packed their SUV with camping gear, plenty of water, and enough food for a week-long journey through the desert landscapes of California and Nevada. Sarah felt excited about the trip, but something deep in her gut made her uneasy. She had studied weather patterns and desert conditions extensively with her grandfather, and she knew that late summer in the Mojave could be unpredictable. The temperatures during the day could reach dangerous levels, and sudden sandstorms were not uncommon. She tried to share her concerns with her parents, but they dismissed her worries as teenage anxiety. On the third day of their trip, the family was driving through a remote section of the desert when their GPS stopped working. Her father, confident in his driving abilities, decided to continue without proper navigation. He took what he thought was a shortcut through a narrow canyon road that wasn't marked on any official maps. The road was rough and rocky, causing their SUV to bounce and shake violently. As they drove deeper into the canyon, the sky began to change color. What had been a clear blue morning was now turning an ominous yellow-brown. Sarah recognized the signs immediately from her training. A massive sandstorm was approaching, and they were in one of the worst possible locations to weather it. The canyon walls would create a funnel effect, making the storm even more dangerous. She urgently told her parents about the approaching danger, but by then it was too late to turn back. The narrow road had no place to make a U-turn, and the storm was moving faster than they could drive. Within minutes, the wind began howling through the canyon, and sand started whipping around their vehicle like a living thing. Visibility dropped to almost zero, and her father had no choice but to stop the car. The storm hit them with the force of a freight train. Sand pounded against their SUV from all directions, creating a deafening roar that made conversation impossible. The windows became completely obscured by the swirling sand, and the vehicle rocked back and forth as powerful gusts of wind threatened to tip them over. Sarah's mother began to panic, clutching her husband's arm and asking what they should do. For 3 terrifying hours, the family huddled inside their SUV as the sandstorm raged around them. Sarah tried to stay calm, remembering everything her grandfather had taught her about desert survival. She knew that panicking would only make the situation worse, and she needed to think clearly about their options. When the storm finally began to weaken, they discovered that their vehicle was completely buried in sand up to the windows. Her father tried to start the engine, but sand had clogged the air intake system. The radio was dead. Their cell phones had no signal, and they were trapped in a metal tomb surrounded by tons of sand. The reality of their situation began to sink in. They were stranded in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, with limited supplies and no way to call for help. The desert that had seemed beautiful and peaceful just hours before had become their prison, and Sarah realized that all her grandfather's training was about to be put to the ultimate test. As the sun climbed higher in the desert sky, the temperature inside the buried SUV began to rise dangerously. Sarah watched the thermometer on the dashboard climb past 90 degrees, and she knew it would only get worse. Her parents sat in stunned silence, still processing the reality of their situation. Her mother kept checking her phone every few minutes, hoping for a miracle signal that never came. Sarah took charge of the situation, drawing on every lesson her grandfather had taught her. She calmly explained to her parents that they needed to conserve their energy and resources. The first priority was getting out of the vehicle before it became an oven. She located the emergency hammer her father kept in the glove compartment and carefully broke the rear window, which was the least buried part of the SUV. Climbing out through the broken window, Sarah found herself standing on a mountain of sand that had completely transformed the landscape. The familiar canyon road had disappeared, replaced by smooth dunes that stretched in every direction. The storm had erased all landmarks, making it impossible to determine which direction led back to civilization. Her parents followed her out of the vehicle, and her mother immediately began to cry when she saw the desolate landscape surrounding them. The silence was overwhelming after the chaos of the storm. Not a single bird or insect could be heard, just the whisper of wind across the sand. Her father tried to dig around the SUV, hoping to free it, but Sarah gently stopped him. She explained that digging in the desert heat would exhaust him quickly and waste precious body water through sweat. Sarah inventoried their supplies with military precision. They had 4 bottles of water, some granola bars, a first aid kit, and basic camping gear. At normal consumption rates, the water would last maybe 2 days in the desert heat. She knew they needed to find help or additional water sources much sooner than that. The nearest town was at least 50 miles away, according to their last GPS reading before the storm. Using techniques her grandfather had taught her, Sarah began reading the landscape for clues about water sources. She looked for areas where vegetation might indicate underground water, studied the way sand had settled after the storm, and observed the flight patterns of any birds in the distance. She also noted the position of the sun and began calculating the best direction to travel based on their last known location. Her parents initially resisted her suggestions, feeling that a 16-year-old shouldn't be making life or death decisions for the family. Her father wanted to stay with the vehicle, believing that rescue teams would eventually find them. Sarah gently but firmly explained that the storm had likely covered any tire tracks, and the buried SUV would be nearly impossible to spot from the air. They needed to take action to save themselves. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Sarah knew they couldn't travel during the day. She convinced her parents to create shade using emergency blankets and wait for evening before attempting to walk out of the desert. During the hottest part of the day, they would need to stay as cool as possible to preserve their body water. She showed them how to breathe slowly and avoid unnecessary movement. As they huddled in their makeshift shelter, Sarah's mother asked her how she knew so much about survival. For the first time since the ordeal began, Sarah smiled as she told them about her grandfather's training. She explained how he had taught her to see the desert not as an enemy, but as a place with its own rules that could be learned and respected. Her parents began to understand that their daughter's unusual hobby might be the thing that saved their lives. When the sun finally began to set, painting the desert in brilliant oranges and purples, Sarah prepared her family for the journey ahead. She distributed the water carefully, giving each person just enough to prevent dehydration while preserving their supply. She packed the most essential items in a small backpack and helped her parents dress appropriately for desert travel. The real test of her training was about to begin, and Sarah knew that every decision she made in the coming hours would determine whether her family lived or died in the unforgiving desert. The desert at night was a completely different world from the blazing furnace of daytime. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped dramatically, and Sarah knew they had a narrow window of opportunity to make progress before the cold became dangerous. She had studied desert survival extensively, and she understood that hypothermia could be just as deadly as heat stroke in this environment. Sarah led her family in a carefully planned route, using the North Star to maintain their direction. Her grandfather had taught her celestial navigation when she was just 10 years old, making her practice until she could find true north even on cloudy nights. She moved slowly and deliberately, checking on her parents every few minutes and adjusting their pace to prevent exhaustion. After walking for 2 hours, her father began to stumble and complain of dizziness. Sarah immediately recognized the early signs of dehydration and heat exhaustion, even in the cooler night air. She found a sheltered area behind a large rock formation and insisted they rest. Despite her father's protests that they needed to keep moving, Sarah knew that pushing too hard would be a fatal mistake. While her parents rested, Sarah explored the immediate area using techniques her grandfather had taught her for finding water in the desert. She looked for signs of animal tracks which might lead to water sources, and searched for areas where the sand was darker or more compact. Her efforts were rewarded when she discovered a small depression between rocks where morning dew might collect. Using her grandfather's method, Sarah placed a clean cloth in the depression and weighted it down with stones. Even a small amount of dew could provide precious additional water. She also set up a simple solar still using plastic sheeting from their emergency kit, positioning it to collect any moisture from the air as the temperature continued to drop during the night. As they prepared to continue their journey, Sarah heard a sound that made her heart race with hope. In the distance, she could hear the faint rumble of an engine. She quickly climbed to the top of the nearest rock formation and saw headlights moving slowly across the desert several miles away. It appeared to be a search and rescue vehicle, probably looking for missing travelers after the storm. Sarah knew they had only one chance to signal for help. She gathered dry brush and small pieces of wood from desert plants, then used a technique her grandfather had taught her to start a signal fire. Using steel wool and a battery from their emergency kit, she created sparks that ignited the tinder. Within minutes, she had a bright fire burning on the highest point of the rock formation. The fire was visible for miles in the clear desert night, but Sarah wasn't sure if the distant vehicle had seen it. She added green vegetation to create thick, white smoke that would be easier to spot against the dark sky. Her parents watched in amazement as their teenage daughter created a professional-grade rescue signal using only basic materials and knowledge. For 30 agonizing minutes, they maintained the fire and watched the distant lights. Just when it seemed the vehicle was moving away, the headlights suddenly changed direction and began moving toward their location. Sarah's mother began crying with relief. But Sarah remained focused on keeping the signal fire burning brightly until help arrived. The rescue vehicle turned out to be a county sheriff's SUV equipped for desert rescue operations. Deputy Rodriguez had been searching for the Martinez family since their rental car company reported them overdue. He was amazed to find them in relatively good condition, especially considering the severity of the storm they had survived. As they loaded into the rescue vehicle, Deputy Rodriguez asked Sarah how she had known to create such an effective signal fire. When she explained about her grandfather's survival training, he shook his head in admiration. He told them that many experienced adults would not have made such smart decisions in their situation. Her knowledge and quick thinking had not only saved her family's lives but had also made the rescue possible. The deputy drove them to a nearby ranger station where they could call their families and arrange transportation home. As they sat in the warm, well-lit building drinking hot coffee and eating sandwiches, Sarah's parents looked at their daughter with new respect and understanding. The quiet teenager who had always seemed obsessed with survival skills had proven that her knowledge was far from a mere hobby. In the desert's harsh classroom, she had graduated with honors, and her family was alive because of everything her grandfather had taught her about respecting and surviving in nature's most challenging environments. At the ranger station, Sarah sat quietly while her parents called their relatives to report they were safe. She could hear her mother's voice shaking as she described their ordeal to her grandmother. Deputy Rodriguez approached Sarah with a cup of hot chocolate and sat down beside her. He had been a search and rescue officer for 15 years, and he had seen many desert survival situations end tragically. The deputy told Sarah that her actions had been nothing short of remarkable. Most people lost in the desert make critical mistakes within the first few hours that doom their chances of survival. They panic, waste energy, drink their water too quickly, or travel during the dangerous daytime heat. Sarah had avoided every common mistake and had actually improved their situation through her knowledge and careful planning. Deputy Rodriguez explained that the sandstorm had been one of the worst in recent memory. Wind speeds had reached over 70 miles per hour, and visibility had dropped to less than 10 feet. 3 other families had been caught in the storm, and rescue teams were still searching for 2 of them. The fact that Sarah's family had not only survived but had also managed to signal for help was extraordinary. As they waited for transportation to be arranged, Sarah's father approached her with tears in his eyes. He apologized for not listening to her concerns about the weather and for dismissing her survival knowledge as a childish hobby. He realized now that his daughter possessed skills and wisdom that had literally saved their lives. Her mother joined them, embracing Sarah and thanking her for keeping the family calm and focused during the crisis. The ranger station supervisor, a woman named Linda Chen, who had worked in desert rescue for over 20 years, asked Sarah detailed questions about her training. She was impressed by the depth of knowledge Sarah had acquired from her grandfather and suggested that Sarah consider a career in emergency management or search and rescue. Linda explained that people with Sarah's combination of theoretical knowledge and practical skills were rare and valuable. Dr. James Harrison, a survival expert from the nearby university who consulted with the Ranger Service, arrived at the station to debrief the family about their experience. He was particularly interested in Sarah's decision-making process during the crisis. Dr. Harrison explained that survival psychology was a complex field, and that most people struggled to think clearly under extreme stress. Sarah's ability to remain calm and apply her knowledge systematically was the key factor in their successful rescue. Sarah learned that her signal fire had been spotted by Deputy Rodriguez from over 8 miles away. The combination of bright flames and white smoke had created a beacon that was impossible to miss against the dark desert landscape. Dr. Harrison noted that many lost hikers failed to create effective signals because they didn't understand the principles of visibility and contrast that Sarah had applied instinctively. The university professor asked Sarah if she would be willing to participate in a research study about survival decision-making. He explained that her case could help develop better training programs for people who work or travel in desert environments. Sarah agreed, understanding that sharing her experience might help save other lives in the future. As dawn broke over the desert, Sarah's family prepared to leave the ranger station. The storm had passed completely, and the morning sun revealed a landscape that looked almost normal again. The sand had settled, and new dunes had formed where the road used to be. Nature had already begun the process of reclaiming the area, erasing most evidence of the previous day's chaos. Before they left, Linda Chen presented Sarah with an honorary junior ranger badge and invited her to return during summer break to participate in survival training programs. She explained that Sarah's experience and knowledge could be valuable in training other young people about desert safety. The badge was small and simple, but Sarah understood that it represented recognition from professionals who understood the true significance of what she had accomplished. Deputy Rodriguez drove the family to the nearest town, where they could rent another vehicle and continue their journey home. As they traveled through the peaceful morning desert, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. She had always respected her grandfather's teachings, but now she truly understood why he had been so insistent that she master these skills. The desert had tested everything he had taught her, and both she and her family had survived because of his wisdom and her dedication to learning. The news of Sarah's desert survival story spread quickly once the family returned home. A local newspaper reporter interviewed them about their experience, and the story was picked up by regional television stations. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention, but she understood that sharing their story might help other families prepare better for outdoor adventures and understand the importance of survival training. Her grandfather was waiting for them when they arrived home, his weathered face showing both relief and pride. He had been worried sick since hearing about the massive sandstorm on the weather reports. When Sarah's parents told him how his granddaughter had used his teachings to save their lives, tears came to his eyes. He had spent years sharing his knowledge with Sarah, hoping she would never need to use it, but also knowing that preparation was the key to survival in any emergency. Sarah's high school principal called a special assembly where she was asked to share her experience with her fellow students. Many of her classmates had always thought her interest in survival skills was strange or unnecessary. Now they listened with fascination and respect as she explained how basic knowledge about navigation, water conservation, and signaling had made the difference between life and death in the desert. The presentation led to an unexpected opportunity. The school's outdoor education teacher approached Sarah about starting a survival skills club. Students were genuinely interested in learning practical skills that could help them in emergency situations. Sarah agreed to help lead the club, working with her grandfather to develop a curriculum that would teach other teenagers essential survival techniques. Dr. Harrison from the university followed up on his offer to include Sarah in his research study. He conducted detailed interviews with her about her thought processes during the crisis, asking her to recreate her decision-making timeline. The research would help develop better training protocols for search and rescue personnel and emergency responders who work in desert environments. Sarah's story also caught the attention of the National Park Service, which invited her to participate in a youth advisory council for desert safety education. Park rangers had noticed that many visitors were unprepared for the challenges of desert environments, and they wanted to develop better educational materials. Sarah's perspective as a young person who had successfully applied survival knowledge was valuable for creating programs that would appeal to teenage visitors. The experience had changed Sarah's relationship with her parents in fundamental ways. They now took her knowledge and opinions seriously, consulting with her before planning any outdoor activities. Her mother enrolled in a basic wilderness first aid course, and her father began reading books about outdoor safety. The family had learned that preparation and education were not signs of paranoia, but intelligent responses to the real dangers present in natural environments. Sarah also began corresponding with other young people who had survived emergency situations in various environments. Through social media and online forums, she connected with teenagers who had survived avalanches, forest fires, and severe storms. They formed an informal network of young survivors who supported each other and shared knowledge about emergency preparedness. Her grandfather was invited to speak at several schools about the importance of teaching practical survival skills to children. He had always believed that basic survival knowledge should be as common as knowing how to drive a car or swim. Sarah's story provided powerful evidence that these skills could make the difference between tragedy and triumph when unexpected disasters occurred. The Survival Skills Club at Sarah's school grew rapidly, attracting students from all backgrounds and interests. They practiced firemaking, navigation, water purification, and emergency signaling in safe, controlled environments. Sarah discovered that she had a natural talent for teaching, breaking down complex concepts into simple, memorable steps that her fellow students could easily learn and apply. Local emergency services began inviting Sarah to assist with community preparedness presentations. Her story resonated with families in ways that traditional safety lectures did not. When a teenager who had survived a real emergency explained the importance of emergency supplies and evacuation plans, people listened with attention and took action to improve their own preparedness. Sarah realized that her desert experience had given her more than just a survival story to tell. It had revealed her life's calling. She began researching colleges with strong emergency management and disaster preparedness programs. Her goal was to become a professional who could help communities and individuals prepare for and respond to natural disasters. The desert had been her teacher, and now she wanted to pass those lessons on to others who might face their own moments of crisis in an unpredictable world. The news of Sarah's desert survival story spread quickly once the family returned home. A local newspaper reporter interviewed them about their experience, and the story was picked up by regional television stations. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention, but she understood that sharing their story might help other families prepare better for outdoor adventures and understand the importance of survival training. Her grandfather was waiting for them when they arrived home, his weathered face showing both relief and pride. He had been worried sick since hearing about the massive sandstorm on the weather reports. When Sarah's parents told him how his granddaughter had used his teachings to save their lives, tears came to his eyes. He had spent years sharing his knowledge with Sarah, hoping she would never need to use it, but also knowing that preparation was the key to survival in any emergency. Sarah's high school principal called a special assembly, where she was asked to share her experience with her fellow students. Many of her classmates had always thought her interest in survival skills was strange or unnecessary. Now they listened with fascination and respect as she explained how basic knowledge about navigation, water conservation, and signaling had made the difference between life and death in the desert. The presentation led to an unexpected opportunity. The school's outdoor education teacher approached Sarah about starting a survival skills club. Students were genuinely interested in learning practical skills that could help them in emergency situations. Sarah agreed to help lead the club, working with her grandfather to develop a curriculum that would teach other teenagers essential survival techniques. Dr. Harrison from the university followed up on his offer to include Sarah in his research study. He conducted detailed interviews with her about her thought processes during the crisis, asking her to recreate her decision-making timeline. The research would help develop better training protocols for search and rescue personnel and emergency responders who work in desert environments. Sarah's story also caught the attention of the National Park Service, which invited her to participate in a youth advisory council for desert safety education. Park rangers had noticed that many visitors were unprepared for the challenges of desert environments, and they wanted to develop better educational materials. Sarah's perspective as a young person who had successfully applied survival knowledge was valuable for creating programs that would appeal to teenage visitors. The experience had changed Sarah's relationship with her parents in fundamental ways. They now took her knowledge and opinion seriously. consulting with her before planning any outdoor activities. Her mother enrolled in a basic wilderness first aid course, and her father began reading books about outdoor safety. The family had learned that preparation and education were not signs of paranoia but intelligent responses to the real dangers present in natural environments. Sarah also began corresponding with other young people who had survived emergency situations in various environments. Through social media and online forums, she connected with teenagers who had survived avalanches, forest fires, and severe storms. They formed an informal network of young survivors who supported each other and shared knowledge about emergency preparedness. Her grandfather was invited to speak at several schools about the importance of teaching practical survival skills to children. He had always believed that basic survival knowledge should be as common as knowing how to drive a car or swim. Sarah's story provided powerful evidence that these skills could make the difference between tragedy and triumph when unexpected disasters occurred. The Survival Skills Club at Sarah's school grew rapidly, attracting students from all backgrounds and interests. They practiced fire-making, navigation, water purification, and emergency signaling in safe, controlled environments. Sarah discovered that she had a natural talent for teaching, breaking down complex concepts into simple, memorable steps that her fellow students could easily learn and apply. Local emergency services began inviting Sarah to assist with community preparedness presentations. Her story resonated with families in ways that traditional safety lectures did not. When a teenager who had survived a real emergency explained the importance of emergency supplies and evacuation plans, people listened with attention and took action to improve their own preparedness. Sarah realized that her desert experience had given her more than 2 years after the desert incident. Sarah received an invitation that would change her life forever. The International Association of Emergency Managers was hosting their annual Youth Leadership Conference, and they wanted Sarah to be the keynote speaker. She would be addressing an audience of emergency management professionals, researchers, and young people from around the world who were interested in disaster preparedness and response. Preparing for the presentation was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Sarah worked with her grandfather to create a comprehensive account of their desert survival experience, focusing on the decision-making processes and practical techniques that had saved their lives. She also researched other survival cases to understand how her experience compared to similar situations and what lessons could be applied more broadly. The conference was held in Denver, Colorado, and Sarah was amazed by the diversity of people who attended. There were seasoned emergency responders who had dealt with hurricanes, earthquakes, and terrorist attacks. There were researchers studying climate change and disaster prediction. There were young people from countries around the world who had survived tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and civil conflicts. During her presentation, Sarah spoke confidently about the importance of preparation, education, and remaining calm under pressure. She demonstrated some of the techniques her grandfather had taught her, showing the audience how to start a fire with basic materials and how to signal for help in various environments. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many experienced professionals commenting on the maturity and wisdom she displayed. After her presentation, Sarah was approached by Dr. Maria Santos, a leading researcher in disaster psychology who worked with the United Nations. Dr. Santos explained that the UN was developing new guidelines for community disaster preparedness, and they were particularly interested in programs that could teach survival skills to young people in disaster-prone regions. Sarah's story and teaching experience made her an ideal candidate to help develop these programs. The opportunity to work with the UN seemed almost too good to be true, but Dr. Santos was serious about bringing Sarah onto the project team. She would work with experts from around the world to create educational materials that could be adapted for different cultures and environments. The goal was to empower young people with basic survival knowledge that could help them protect themselves and their families during natural disasters. Sarah accepted the position, knowing that it would require her to travel extensively and work with people from many different backgrounds. Her first assignment was to visit communities in Southeast Asia that were frequently affected by typhoons and flooding. She would study how local people prepared for and responded to these disasters, then help develop training programs that combined traditional knowledge with modern survival techniques. Working in the field was both challenging and rewarding. Sarah spent weeks in remote villages, learning from local experts who had generations of experience dealing with natural disasters. She discovered that many communities had sophisticated traditional methods for predicting weather patterns and preparing for storms. Her job was to help document these methods and combine them with modern safety techniques to create comprehensive preparedness programs. The work also took her to refugee camps where people who had survived major disasters were trying to rebuild their lives. Sarah met children who had lost their homes to earthquakes, floods, and wars. She saw firsthand how survival knowledge could make the difference between despair and hope in the aftermath of catastrophic events. These experiences deepened her commitment to disaster preparedness education and showed her the global scope of the challenges facing vulnerable communities. Her grandfather continued to be her closest advisor and supporter throughout these experiences. They maintained regular contact through video calls, and he provided guidance when she faced difficult decisions or challenging situations. He was proud to see how his granddaughter was using the knowledge he had shared with her to help people around the world. But he also worried about her safety as she worked in dangerous and unstable regions. Sarah's work with the UN led to recognition from other international organizations. She was invited to speak at conferences, consult on emergency preparedness projects, and help develop training materials for various agencies. Despite her young age, she had become a respected voice in the emergency management community. Known for her practical approach and ability to communicate just a survival story to tell. It had revealed her life's calling. She began researching colleges with strong emergency management and disaster preparedness programs. Her goal was to become a professional who could help communities and individuals prepare for and respond to natural disasters. The desert had been her teacher, and now she wanted to pass those lessons on to others who might face their own moments of crisis in an unpredictable world. 5 years had passed since the sandstorm that changed everything. Sarah, now 21 and a college graduate with degrees in emergency management and international relations, stood once again in the Mojave Desert. This time, she was leading a team of researchers and emergency responders on a training expedition designed to test new survival techniques and communication technologies. In extreme desert conditions, the location was deliberately chosen to be near the canyon where her family had been trapped years earlier. Sarah wanted to return to the place where her grandfather's teachings had been put to the ultimate test. The landscape looked different now, shaped by years of wind and weather, but she could still recognize the general area where their SUV had been buried beneath tons of sand. Her team included experienced desert rescue specialists, technology experts testing new emergency communication devices, and researchers studying how people make decisions under extreme stress. Sarah had become the expedition leader not because of her academic credentials, but because of her proven ability to remain calm and make good decisions when lives were at stake. The week-long expedition was designed to simulate various emergency scenarios that travelers might face in desert environments. The team would test everything from water purification techniques to new satellite communication systems that could work even during severe weather events. Sarah's role was to ensure that all safety protocols were followed, while pushing the boundaries of what was possible in terms of desert survival and rescue operations. On the third day of the expedition, nature provided an unexpected test of their preparations. Weather reports indicated that another major sandstorm was approaching the area, similar in intensity to the one Sarah had experienced with her family. Instead of evacuating, the team decided to use this as an opportunity to test their emergency protocols and new technologies under real conditions. Sarah coordinated the team's response to the approaching storm with the same calm efficiency she had shown as a 16-year-old. She supervised the construction of emergency shelters, managed communication with base camp, and ensured that all team members understood their roles and responsibilities. Her experience and leadership were evident as she guided the team through preparations that could mean the difference between a successful research mission and a dangerous rescue situation. When the storm hit, it was every bit as fierce as the one from her teenage experience. The new technologies performed well, maintaining communication links that would have been impossible 5 years earlier. The emergency shelters held firm against the wind and sand, protecting the team from the worst effects of the storm. Sarah's careful planning and the team's preparation allowed them to weather the storm safely, while collecting valuable data about desert survival techniques. After the storm passed, Sarah stood on the same type of sand dune that had once threatened her family's lives. Now she understood these landscapes not as hostile enemies, but as challenging environments that could be navigated safely with proper knowledge and preparation. The desert had taught her respect for nature's power, but it had also shown her that human intelligence and preparation could overcome even the most extreme natural challenges. Her grandfather, now in his 80s, had joined the expedition as a special advisor. Seeing him standing beside her in the desert where his teachings had saved her family's lives was an emotional moment for Sarah. He told her that watching her become a leader in emergency management was the greatest achievement of his life. The knowledge he had passed down through generations had found its ultimate expression in his granddaughter. As work to protect others, the research from the expedition would contribute to new safety, guidelines for desert travel and improved training, programs for emergency responders. Sarah's leadership during the storm demonstrated that the lessons learned from survival experiences could be systematically applied to help others prepare for similar challenges. The data collected would help save lives for years to come. As the expedition concluded, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a scared teenager buried in sand to a professional emergency manager leading cutting-edge research. The desert had been her harshest teacher, but also her most valuable one. Every grain of sand that had threatened to bury her family had ultimately contributed to building her expertise and commitment to helping others survive nature's most challenging tests. Sarah's story had come full circle, but her mission was just beginning. She had plans to establish a new research institute focused on youth disaster preparedness, expand international training programs, and continue developing technologies that could help people survive in extreme environments. The desert that had once been her battlefield had become her classroom, and now she was ready to teach others how to emerge victorious from their own encounters with nature's ultimate challenges. The sand that had buried her family had been transformed into the foundation of a life dedicated to ensuring that others would have the knowledge and skills needed to survive whatever storms might come their way.